Did you know over 2 million people died in the Vietnam War? Over 58,000 of them were Americans. The Vietnamese people suffered the most. More than 1.5 million Vietnamese soldiers and 2 million Vietnamese civilians were killed. Between the years of 1954 and 1975, North Vietnam and South Vietnam fought each other to rule the entire country. It was a long, brutal war with both sides, willing to do anything to win. We'll go into details later, but first, let's start at the beginning. Do you think it's okay to help someone if they ask for help? What if you don't agree with what they want to do? That's the tough position America found themselves in when they got involved in the Vietnam War. After World War II, many countries in Asia wanted to break free from their colonizers in Europe. Vietnam was one of those countries. They had been under French rule for a long time and wanted to set their own course. Ho Chi Minh was the leader of the Viet Minh, a group fighting for Vietnam's independence. He asked the French to leave Vietnam alone, and the French refused, so the Viet Minh fought back. By 1954, they had defeated the French enough to force them to the negotiating table. And with that, the Geneva Accords were signed and Vietnam would be split in half at the 17th parallel. The North would be led by Ho Chi Minh, and the South would be led by Ngo Dinh Diem. They would hold elections in 1956 to unify the country again. But the US and the Soviet Union would sponsor each side, so the election never happened. This is where America gets involved. Why do you think America was against communism? During this time period, the US was still reeling from the Great Depression and World War II. They felt threatened by the rise of communism in Russia and China. America believed that they had to contain communism, so it wouldn't spread to other countries in Asia. This meant they had to help the government in South Vietnam, who opposed communism, even if their methods were brutal. Do you think America did the right thing by getting involved? Diem was not a good ruler. He was corrupt, he went against the Geneva Accords, and he suppressed the rights of his own people. People living in South Vietnam suffered greatly under his rule. Many turned to the Viet Cong, a communist group in South Vietnam, who wanted to overthrow Diem and unify the country under the North. And who did the US think would win a war between two terrible options? They tried to convince Diem to fix his ways, but he refused. So in 1963, the US helped launch a coup d'etat, which is a fancy way of saying they helped some military leaders take him out. This didn't solve anything. Each side kept taking more land, and more people died. And America was being pulled deeper and deeper into a conflict they couldn't get out of. To make things worse, many people in the US thought the war was wrong and protested against it. We'll talk more about the protests later, but first we need to go back to Vietnam. The US needed a way out of this quagmire. At first, President Lyndon Johnson wanted to ramp up American involvement. He began bombing North Vietnam to try to force them to come to the negotiating table, but it didn't work. Things kept getting worse and worse. In 1965, he decided to send ground troops into South Vietnam. Do you think America should have done more to try to end the war before sending in troops? Why or why not? With the arrival of American troops, the war intensified. The jungle warfare was brutal. Both sides used hit-and-run tactics against each other. The Americans called this type of warfare wearing, and the Vietnamese called it asymmetric warfare. It was very effective against the Americans because they didn't know the jungle like the Vietnamese did. They also didn't know how to speak Vietnamese, and most of them hadn't even seen combat before. Because of these factors, many American soldiers were confused and demoralized, and more importantly, they were dying. There were many famous battles during the war, like the Battle of the Ia Drang River, where American helicopters were flying back and forth all day, rescuing troops and bringing in supplies. There were other times where entire villages were wiped out, like at My Lai. These events, along with countless others like them, tarnished America's image around the world. Do you think the US could have won the Vietnam War? Why or why not? For 8 years, America sent more men and resources into Vietnam. But by 1973, it became clear that they weren't going to win. President Richard Nixon wanted out. He agreed to a ceasefire with North Vietnam and withdrew American troops. But just 2 years later, Saigon fell and the war was over. South Vietnam had no hope without the United States. After 20 years of fighting, all the lives lost and all the money spent, It seemed like America had nothing to show for it. But wait a second, aren't we forgetting something? What about the Vietnamese people? How did they feel about the war? Well, it wasn't much better for them either. In the end, North Vietnam won, but it came at a great cost. Vietnam was in ruins and millions of Vietnamese people were dead. What did they have to show for it? Unfortunately, just like America, not much. Although many Vietnamese people did fight for a noble cause, sadly, communism failed to deliver on its promises. Under North Vietnam, the economy faltered, freedom of speech was non-existent, and the people lived under constant fear of the government. After the war ended, many Americans felt betrayed. They had poured blood, sweat, and tears into Vietnam, and it seemed like for nothing. Others felt like they had no choice but to fight in Vietnam, because if they didn't, they would be betraying their friends who were fighting there too. Still others felt angry that their government lied to them about the war. One of the biggest scandals during the Vietnam War was the Gulf of Tonkin incident. On August 2, 1964, American destroyers were patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin near the coast of North Vietnam. They were looking for trouble, and they got it. The North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked the Americans and the U.S. fought back. 2 days later, the U.S. claimed they were attacked again, and this time they struck back harder, sinking or capturing 3 enemy ships and killing hundreds of men. The attack was avenged, and the U.S. was justified in their actions in Vietnam. President Lyndon B. Johnson used the incident to persuade Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This resolution gave him power to take any action necessary to repel armed attacks against the forces of the U.S. and to prevent further aggression. Essentially, this resolution allowed Johnson to expand the war however he saw fit. However, it was later discovered that the second attack never happened. The U.S. had fabricated the whole thing. Why do you think they did this? Was it to get more funding for the war or support for the president, or maybe to sell newspapers? Do you think it was ever okay to lie to the public? Let us know in the comments. The Vietnam War changed America forever. It left deep scars on the hearts and minds of many Americans. They questioned their leaders, their country's purpose, and themselves. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke out against the war. He said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on weapons research and development than on the needs of its own people, that pours half of its resources into military rather than into medicine and education, that spends over $30 billion a year to destroy the forces of communism abroad, while it fails to make adequate provision for the needs of the very large number of its own people who are living in poverty. That's the kind of nation we are." Do you think he had a point? The Vietnam War was one of the most controversial wars America has ever fought. It brought a nation together and tore it apart at the same time. As you reflect on this war and other wars throughout history, remember the words of Martin Luther King Jr. May they inspire us to make a better future for ourselves and for our world. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share. Thank you for watching and see you soon.